That's kind of what it was. Okay.
All right, so hi everybody. So again, my name is Serge Thomas. My background is in actually oceanography, so I study especially algae and marine macroalgae, so seaweeds. That's how I started. And the reason I actually came a little bit later to what we call limnology, so Limno logy, so the study of lakes and rivers, is because I found that most of the coasts are damaged, mainly because of the nutrient coming from, inland.
Excuse me. Greg, can that go even lower?
Yeah, I did as long as it.
At first it turned up and then it went down, but lower would be even better.
So, so my background, for my PhD, I basically did a lot of research on African lakes, which are very, very similar to your lakes. They're basically reservoirs, and people do different activities, and I study what we call eutrophication, so the nutrients getting into the water and what impact it had on the whole ecosystem. And then I came here, work on the in 2001, work at FIU and Florida International University, where I was a visiting professor, and I did some teaching as well as studied the Everglades, and especially stormwater treatment areas. I'm not sure you know what it is, but these are basically constructed wetlands that are aimed to filter the water from Lake Okeechobee. I think you heard about it quite a bit lately. Where the water is going east and west with the St. Lucie River, the Caloosahatchee River, and we try to divert that water south to the stormwater treatment areas, and we want more of it so that the water will flow freely down to Florida Bay and be filtered by the system. So the reason I'm making a little bit of that parable is because I want to talk about the pond, and the pond can be also very, very be easily compared to stormwater treatment filters in a way. They're supposed to normally be a buffer between communities and the bay. And that's why most of my research been focused on this pond since actually 2005, where I studied that with the city of Miami Lakes, where I studied their ponds. And then I got hired here at NDCU in 2008, and I thought that it would be a good thing to do to start also working again on these ponds. And I had experience working with CDDs. I had a contract 2013, 2014 with Bayside Bay Creek, so Pelican Landing.
Say that one again.
Bayside Bay Creek CDDs. That's Pelican Landing. That's along US 41. So they encompass 91 lakes, and they asked me to assess 11 of the lakes, which totaled about a third of the surface area of all the lake combined. And so they wanted to know, how healthy was the lake, and how much muck the lakes had, and if dredging was necessary, if they were doing the right thing regarding aeration, regarding the watershed management all around. And that was a really intensive work, because we actually surveyed the lake every month. So there's 11 lakes with several stations, and we surveyed the sediment once a year to give them a map of where they had higher sediment deposition rates and when they had lower sediment deposition rate, to see the active dredge. And then it gave them an idea of when they were supposed to dredge in the future. So if they want to set money aside to know when dredging will be necessary. Thankfully, it was decades away. That also helped them to manage. So since this study, I've done a lot of other lakes, especially Carlton Lakes, which is not very far away from here, Longshore Lake, Village Walk as well, Pelican Preserve, Burn Store Lakes, which is in Punta Gorda. And a lot of lakes down in Naples, for the city of Naples. So I got Lake Manor, Spring Lakes, and Little Harbor Lakes. So I've got quite experience with working with lakes and working with communities, and being invited to CDDs, giving my report. So I'm not intimidated by you guys too much, because it was really intimidating actually the first time I actually gave my report every month to the CDD over at Pelican Landing. I was the first to meet you, to have that kind of monitoring of my research, because every month I had to give a report, and that was quite actually time consuming. So based on all that research, because you always had the guinea pig at the beginning, where I don't know anything about the lakes, and I do a very high frequency in terms of sampling. Now I understand better the system, so you guys benefit from that. And also I have improved the technique I used, and also have higher tech equipment to survey the lakes. So I can actually provide you guys with some savings, substantial in terms of monitoring the lakes. Now I know exactly when is the most critical time to actually survey the lake. So instead of doing every month, I can actually say, okay, this period is actually the best. And in my proposal, I suggested 3 periods, which are critical during the season for a lake. The whole what we call hydrological season, so the whole hydrological year. So that would be the end of the dry season, where the lakes actually have receded. And hopefully we're not going to have an odd year like this year, because this year is completely out of chart. But so a very dry season where the lakes have receded, and eventually the nutrients have concentrated quite a bit. So when the nutrients concentrate, you have generally more algae development. The plants also are growing very well. And then we have after the first flush. So the flush is characterized by a sudden increase of the water level after a big rain during the rainy season. And generally it happens, beginning of June, beginning of July, sometime end of May. So I monitor very closely. And then once I have the first flush, I sample. That gives you an idea of how much nutrients actually are in the watershed and how much is getting as a surge of nutrients getting into your lake. So that could tell you, okay, well, your watershed actually is pretty impaired. It's got a lot of nutrients, and you might want to put some buffer, for example. It's just an application of that. And then after that, I wait until the end of the rainy season. So generally around end of October, beginning of November, when the lakes are very high in water level. If you have lakes that actually are connected to an overflow box, they have been turnovers. The water has turned over several times because you have water flushing again, flushing the water out. And generally at that time of the year, you have the best quality possible of the lake. So that tells me, what your lake can do, possibly when they're very clean. And these 3 periods are really critical. Now, sometimes I add the 4th period, which I didn't include, which is the winter. But you need a very good cold front, because when you have a cold front, you have what we call the water turnover. The water gets colder on the surface, and then it sinks down to the bottom because cold water sinks and mixes your lake, and that's also an event. But I found out that it's difficult to capture, and you need to have the right conditions, so I generally don't do it anymore. So 3 events for the water column. And when we do the water column, so I have very high-end probes. That's also save time. At the beginning, the student had to record everything on a piece of paper, and then we have to enter the data. So now I have probes that auto-record. So you just drop in the water, measure the depth, and by increment, you measure the temperature, the conductivity, the pH, a zillion of important parameters that help me understand if your lake is healthy for the water column, especially. And then with this, I especially like to look at the sediment. So why the sediment? Because the sediment is another way to assess more long-term of the lake health. Knowing that if you have a lot of nutrient getting into a lake, you will generally have a lot more sediment getting into the lake as well. So nutrient is like food. If you put a lot of food, you have more algae and plants growing, and when they die, they decay, can get to the bottom and fill up your muck. And I analyze that muck. I look at how much nutrient is tied up with that muck, and it also tells me over a much longer term, I would say 5, 6, 7 years, reflects the 5 years prior to my venue here, surveying the lake, so if what you've done in the past is good. I can see that. I have people who have recently changed their management. The water column is better, but when I look at the sediment, I can see that there was some issue in the past, and they're remediated because the water column doesn't reflect what the sediment tells me. So I confront results from water column and sediment as well. Also look at the proportion of organic matter you have in the sediment. That tells me, for example, if your sediment is mostly sand and silt and what we call inorganic, so not really contributing to the lake water quality, but it tells me that you have erosion problem. I have some instances where you have very visual bank erosions, and you can see that the bottom of the lake is mostly sand and very little muck, because muck is mostly organic. So I know that you have erosion problem, and I point that out, and you're losing property, and you've got to do something about this. And if it's very, very organic, it means you have a lot of nutrient. And sometimes it's combination of both. Sometimes when they're all mixed together, it's more difficult to tease apart what is erosion, what is actually is too much nutrients. But generally, too much nutrient prevail because that's the first thing you want to fix. Because then the lake looks nasty, and you have algae bloom, and you have to use remediation, copper sulfate, for example, to knock out the algae, and other chemicals to knock out the plants. So that's pretty much my approach. On top of that, I added the fish population because you have a lot of anglers here willing to know, is fish population healthy? Now here you might actually play the role of the guinea pig a little bit, is that you can in natural lakes have experience assessing how the lake are healthy by using what we call bioindicators. And fish population is a bioindicator. So especially because they are at the end of the food chain. So if you have a healthy bottom in your food chain, you have a healthy top. And the fish population will tell me if your lake is healthy. If you got too many tilapias and catfish, definitely there's an issue with the bottom. So we can actually relate the two, and that will that also give you another idea of we call the trophic dynamics of the if your food web is healthy, is it well balanced? Do you need to do something about your tilapia? Because if you have some catfish actually can create burrows into the banks and increase the erosion, that's also something I've seen. That also will tell us, do you need to stock with more bass to actually keep the forage fish down, because too much forage fish is actually not healthy as well. So yeah, several other things. We're also going to do the what we call the macrophytes, so the plants, the aquatic plants, whether they're emerged or submerged. For this, I use a new sonar that first gives you a rough assessment of what's on the bottom. So basically, the sonar measures the top of the canopy of the plant underwater, and he knows by looking at the echo, because that's an echo sounder, so it's hitting a sound, and the sound bounces back from the bottom back to the top, but also from the plants to the top. And it tells me how much volume the plants are occupying the bottom. So it gives me an idea of how much cover I have on the bottom in terms of submerged aquatic vegetation, the thing you cannot see. And then we'll do some, grad to make sure, we call it ground truthing, to make sure it's actually your plants and what type of plants you have. So that leads me to the fish again, because I know that you can use fish to also remediate some problem. For example, hydrilla. So hydrilla is an aquatic plant which is highly invasive. It does have some benefits. For example, bass. I work in Lake Trafford where we do the same kind of thing with DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. But basically, we were talking eventually to add grass carp as to treat the symptom of excessive amount of submerged aquatic vegetation. However, the grass carp will only choose what I call their best, the best bangs for the bucks. I think that's what you say. Best bang for your bucks, meaning that it will. A fish will only choose the plant first that are palatable, so tasty to them, and the one that have the highest return in terms of energy. So because they're spending energy to graze upon plants, but they also need to have that energy feedback, or it's not worth their time. So depending on the plants, you might add at some point, at the end of the report, I'll tell you that some grass carp at the right amount to suppress the vegetation, and you want to go very easy on that. We had the experience with Miramar Lakes, I'm not sure you heard about it, where they stocked with a lot of grass carp, and they worked very well. They removed all the vegetation, but now the lake turned turbid because the vegetation does have a benefit, meaning that it maintains the banks and also prevent the nutrient from entering the pond. So you have to be extremely careful with grass carp. So that tells you an idea, what's the plant coverage, what are they, And how can we treat them? You know, if you have a certain plant that the grass cat won't eat, they won't touch it. They will actually eat the desirable plant and don't touch the plant you want to eradicate. So we might have to, you know, use some chemicals to knock these plants, or eventually mechanical removal, which we have talked about with Dr. Thomas here, about you know, basically mowing and, you know, removing plant, which is a very good practice in Trout lakes. They've done it, for example. So you're removing biomass and at the same time you're removing nutrients, so we'll see. And then there's a component here which is also very new. I mean, not new to my research field, but new in terms of applying it to retention detention ponds. So again, that's potentially, again, here the guinea pig. When you look at the bacteria, and the bacteria are very important because they also reflect how healthy your pond is. And then I'm not talking the like Escherichia coli, you know, E. coli, that you see in the news, which is basically linked to you know, dog poop or anything like that. It actually tells you if you have the right bacteria in the water, that eventually will break down your muck. And if you need eventually to do some addition of good bacteria, that's a new topic. So, you know, we're getting here into the grayish area where there's not a lot of research supporting that, but there are a lot of people that say that they have great result by adding the right bacteria, and they have high reduction of muck without even using aerators. And I've seen this data, but the problem with it's not done scientifically, so I'm not sure if that's snake oil or some other thing I don't understand, but it's really grayish area here. So this component would help us to first know if you have the right bacteria, if your lake bed bacteria are healthy in terms of composition, or they actually you have the nasty bacteria that will create some you know, bad odor, for example, or the bacteria that are inadequate for to treat the lake. And then I talked to a company over in Fort Myers. I forgot the name, but they gave us. I'm part of an alliance called Greenscape Alliance, where, you know, we have a lot of workshops and we educate homeowners about their ponds. And they gave us a little seminar about the enzyme and bacteria they're using. And I was talking to them about you guys and say, you know, I'm working with this grant, and because it's going to be interesting, they have very, very different lakes, so we're going to actually study the bacterial community. And if we identify 2 or 3 lakes, do you think we can do an experiment on these lakes, meaning that we could have you guys giving us a product, we apply the product on one lake and on the 2 other lakes that look similar, but so first I have to study them, and then to identify which lake are a good candidate, and then we treat that one and we don't treat the other one to see if it works. And then if it works, then you might want to buy the product, and then we'll have a paper, so that's good for the company. Everybody's happy, pretty much. And that's something I've been willing to do for a very long time. It's just didn't have the opportunity. And the person who does the bacteria is not me, but that's Toshihiro Rakawa. He's a Japanese. He actually came to a presentation I gave to the quarry last year, I think.
6 months ago.
6 months ago, right? Yeah, he's very, very, very good with bacteria. He's one of the top. He's got several papers in Nature. He's really on the top.
That's the other name on the proposal, or?
No, I think it's there. There is a bacterial component in.
Hidetoshi?
Yes.
Yeah, Hidetoshi.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
Toshi.
he's on the front of the.
It is as a co-PI, yes.
Let me ask if I could, the aquatic ecology group, is this an adjunct of the university, or is it an independent group that's?
No, it's basically the name of my lab.
You're okay.
Yeah. I didn't want it to call the Thomas Lab. I think it's very pretentious. Okay. Like I have a lot of colleagues who say, "Oh, that's my Fugates Lab." That person. So me, it's just.
So it's a private enterprise outside of the.
No, it's not at all. It's part of the university. It doesn't
okay.
really have any
Okay.
official name. It's the way I call it at my university. Like my students know this is my lab. So I've been pushing that name here. We have a seagrass ecology lab. Group, and it doesn't have any. It's not really an entity. It's just a name, a nickname if you prefer.
In terms of staffing for the proposals that you've given us, how much of it is is in-house, and to what extent is like, is part of the lab work sent out, or is it all done in-house? How does it
It's
split?
about 80% in-house, 20% out of the house. And when I say 20% out of the house, we're still within the house because it's basically collaborator in other university that will do the work. The reason I don't do the nutrient is that, well, first it's labor intensive, and unless I have a lot of nutrient, we do have, I do have experience, I know how to do this. We have an auto analyzer for nutrient at FGCU, which is very state-of-the-art one. But I found out that it's easier to just send over my sample to my former lab at FIU, and their state recognized, meaning they actually have what we call the NELAC or NELAP certification, which is a national accreditation that says that actually these results can eventually be used in the court of law. So at some point, if you want to use it, you have very, very good results, and I think it's important because sometimes, especially, when I was working for Village Works, there was a litigation, so I decided to start doing this, and the lab, my former lab, just gave me the same rate as the lab as for people who work at FIU. So you guys are getting a good rate, and you're getting very good results with all the QA/QC and very rigorous, which I can't really have here at FGCU. The other thing is the DNA sequencing. If you guys want to go the route for the bacteria, we can do the fish also as well, because we're using what we call eDNA. So basically, we're taking water and then we extract the DNA from the water. It's not like what we used to do in the past, where you have to look under the microscope and count everything for bacteria, because it's nearly impossible, because they all look the same. So now everything is done through DNA. And for the fish population, that's eDNA. Actually, I just came back from what we call the Ecological Society of America. It's a big, very big event, which it's happening still at Fort Lauderdale. I'm going back tomorrow. eDNA is really something that everybody's studying now, because basically you take a little water and all the fish population that are in that water. It's pretty amazing. So that will have to be submitted to a lab that actually have this, what we call this DNA sequencing capability, and it's going to be also a lab in the U.S. From a university, accredited university. Other than that, everything else will be graduate and undergraduate work, which are trained by me, and I QA/QC the data, and also assist them in the field the first few days to make sure everything's okay. But we are not doing. It's rigorous. It's this is going to be publishable data. It's going to be well. Like when I work for DEP or when I work for the district, it's going to be the same techniques. I'm not modifying anything. It's just it's the same stuff. Yeah. So you're going to have good data. Good data. Like if you had invited DEP to survey your lake, you'd have the same quality of data. Lake Trafford, we're working with DEP, so we have to go through this very stringent sampling protocol. It's going to be the same protocol.
I don't know if you've gotten through the bulk of what you wanted to say. We started giving you some questions.
Whenever,
okay.
When I teach, I tell my student, please interrupt me at any given
Okay.
time. And I know I have an accent, so sometimes it's hard to catch. I apologize for that. There's nothing I can do about it.
My questions, the global question I have is and it stems in part from very limited understanding of this. I have no water science knowledge, and I'm trying to understand. This seems like an exceedingly thorough, intensive study, and I'm trying to understand. Do we need to do all
Okay.
of this? Why do we need to do all of this? Do other communities, you mentioned a few communities, have other communities been doing this kind of intensive study of their ponds and lakes?
Okay, so basically, when I was asked to do this, and I told Dr. Thomas here, I said, I'm just going to give you, in the ideal world, you have all the money available, what I would do, knowing the thing I know from past experiments from other HOAs or CDDs. So based on the experience from the CDDs and HOAs, I cut down the number of samples. So this would be I don't know your legs yet. So when you go to the doctor at the beginning, I guess it's the same thing. They had to had patients and they had to do a very intensive work with them, and then they understand better how that works. But still, each patient is different. So we still cannot predict how each patient will be gauged depending on the different array of tools that you have available to assess their health. I'm using that analogy so it's more layman terms. So for what I gave you as like a menu when you go to the restaurant for all the lakes, pretty much. It doesn't mean that you got to do it for all the lakes. It would be ideal to do it for all the lakes. I understand that even for me, when I apply for grants, I know that if I push too high the budget, I'm never going to get the grant. So generally, we know how much it would cost if I would do everything. And then we have different ways to cut the budget down. And basically, you can do what we call a randomization. So let's say you only have money for 2/3 of it, so we just randomize the lakes and we pick randomly 1/3 or 2/3 of them or half of them, and then we use them. We also have other technique and I think it's smarter to do it where you identify watershed. So lakes that are connected to each other, for example, that would be a watershed, and they share the same watershed. Then instead of surveying all of them, you would randomly pick one, because there is nothing wrong with random, and that would cut also the budget down. So actually, with Dr. Thomas, we were thinking eventually cutting everything to 1/3. For example, for Pelican Landing, I told you 91 ponds, but we only surveyed 11. Basically, I identified all the watershed, and I said, okay, well, we're going to pick some in there. And for them, they had a little issues when they picked the lake, because they actually picked the lakes they wanted to be surveyed. And they had some issues with some of the homeowners say, why is this lake and not my lake? Because it looks like it was not random. So I told Dr. Thomas it would be better if we actually identify, not watershed, I think we're talking about communities.
We put it in quadrants and then pick from each lot.
Yeah, putting in quadrant, and then within each quadrant we'll do just a lottery. That's going to be this like sending the candidate. So everybody will be happy. He doesn't feel that, they feel it actually was fair to everybody because there's nothing about random, right? So that would be one way to cut the budget. Also, the budget I gave you is a budget that is, it doesn't show how much really, what would be my student salary, what would be my cost for analysis, what would be my cost. That's once we agree on the number of the lakes. My institution obliged me to actually show you the real budget. Basically how much it costs, how much hours of etudiant time you're going to have, how much each analyte will cost to analyze, etc., etc. Because that would be broken down. So it took a little bit more time to do this, but I think it's easier for you guys to see, okay, well, to do bacteria, that cost me this. And then you know how many lakes, so you can divide by the number of the lake and just do, across multiplication, figure out how much it costs per lake. So it's like a menu going to a restaurant if you want, but because the restaurants don't show you how much taxes they got to pay and the employees and the fringe and all that. But you'll have that because I'm obliged to give you the real budget once we agree on the number of lakes.
If I can understand that the proposal is presented, that there are I see basically 6 study events, 6 study areas.
Right.
So
yeah.
if we were budget constrained and we were trying to have less than the full menu, are you saying that the way to go would be to do samples of fewer ponds?
Correct.
And cut it back that way, or would you cut one of the study events out?
Well, that's something we also discussed, and I was trying to advocate all the different points today. The real, the sediment, that's one. Mm-hmm. The water column, that's one, and I think you can't cut any of those. The bathymetry, I forgot the bathymetry. The lake bottom topography, making a map. That's you can't do any aquatic ecology unless you know what
So
your
you
lake
need,
resembles to.
you need that.
Yeah, and actually we thought of actually doing it for all the lakes.
That's
actually.
correct, I
Yeah,
thought from our
I
side.
thought that was a strong, and I think it's good because you know the volume, you know, the fishermen likes it, they know the map, and you know when you have your, for example, for Brunstore Lake, they're super happy because they have a lot of fishermen, and that gives them, you know, that big map, and now they have all the bathymetry of all the, you know, so all fishermen know exactly where it's going to be deeper, shallower, where you have more plants, where you have less plants. So they liked it, and I think it's it gives you a lot of publicity because that's something that most people can relate to. You know, the map of the bottom of the lakes. So this I would do for all the lakes. And then after that, for all the other, you know, we can cut to a third. I think a third would be a good happy spot to be in terms of budget, I think, and still a fair assessment of or representation of what the vast majority of the lake is. You know, when you have a survey on the population, you generally take a subsample. You don't really analyze every individual.
Let me ask one other thing, and then I want to encourage others who have questions to ask them. We've had I don't know if we'd call it a friction point, disagreement point, or at least an issue of concern between the two communities with respect to the Illinois pondweed and the extended growth that we have. And I think that's kind of driven, you know, part of our discussion. So this is an assessment. It's not a treatment plan. You're saying the treatment plan would come after
Yes.
the assessment, as I understand it. But what I have a limited understanding of Illinois pondweed. It's apparently helpful in some ways, and in some ways it's a good thing. But you could have too much of a good thing, and part of it may be aesthetics. Part of it may be does it interfere with boating. Do you have an opinion as to where we stand with Illinois pondweed at this
Well,
point?
I have the exact response to this. For the city of Miami Lakes, they wanted us to assess the pond, so a bit like you guys. And then we actually made a survey. And that's not part of the proposal here, but that's something you could do internally, and we could find some questions to ask. No, the pond is yours. And people who use the pond have different expectations. And unfortunately, one pond cannot please everybody the way it's managed. The fishermen would like to have more Illinois pondweed, but not too much, of course, but generally is a sweet spot, about 30% coverage, so that the bass can have, you know, hideouts, send for the forage fish and to lay eggs and so on and so forth. It's got a habitat. And then we had the people over at Miami Lake and say, no, I just want a lake to go swimming. I don't want any weeds. Right? That's that as well. And then, you know, you had everything in between. So depending on what you want as a lake, it's very subjective. You know, what's the purpose of the lake? If the lake is ready just to go on the boat and the weed, there is a problem. You got to find a way to maintain the weed. So the trickiest part here is to make everybody happy and find that sweet spot where everybody is not super happy but not super unhappy, and that's a very, very delicate balance that has to be reached. So for the city of Miami Lake, what we actually did is that we identified the lake that was good for a fishing lake. So this is a good fishing lake, and I think we should keep it as a fishing lake. And if you want to go fishing, you got to go to that lake. Maybe not fish the lake that is in front of a property. But this lake is a good fishing lake, and we'll manage it we'll tell the management company to manage it as a fishing lake. This lake is good for swimming because they had it was all cement all around, and they say, well, this is not going to be ecologically viable for bass fishing. So this lake had good swimming lake. So you want to make sure the watershed is clean, that your dog don't go there, and you make sure you have culvert that are clean. That's going to be a swimming lake. See, something like that. So I'm not sure I really answer your question, but it basically reflects what the people want about their lakes. For Lake Trafford, for example, you know, it used to have a lot of hydrilla. It actually was originally a crappie fish lake, and then they had hydrilla. Hydrilla is, again, that's a big invasive species. submerged aquatic vegetation, and he took over the lake, especially in the littoral zone, and then he became one of the top bass fishing tournament lake in the state, and people were really happy about Hydrilla, the fishermen were. But then Hydrilla eventually reached a tipping point where it completely covered the lake, and now nobody could actually get on the lake beside having an airboat. Then it became a problem, and then they had to treat it. And unfortunately, they over-treated it and they killed everything, and everything, the lake became very turbid, and then it was back to a crappy lake, but really crappy in terms of crappy lake. So see, it depends on what you want, and it's tough because we have to please everybody, and you'll know that you always will have some people who are not happy, but you want to maybe not dissatisfy the most. The vast majority.
Go ahead.
What method would you use to get let's assume that we want to cut back the Illinois pine weed at certain areas. What method would you use?
As an ecologist, and from what I've seen, I really like the mechanical removal because it allows you to select the area that you want eventually to remove weeds. When you put chemicals, even though it's I understand you're treating, the water is not like the air, it's moving all around, so you can have collateral damages. But the mechanical removal is like, mowing, and you just, for example, if you had and I was mentioning that to Miramar Lakes, where they had also the same problem with Illinois pondweed plus Hydrilla. But basically they just had problem because the boat could not exit to get to the open water and do their wakeboarding or whatever it is with the boat. So I said, you just buy the machine, and every so often you just create your channel, and the boat will be happy to be in the open, and you still have very good, littoral zone for fishing. And
But doesn't it just grow back when you mow?
Well, it's like mowing the grass, of course. Yes, yeah, it's something that's recurrent. But the good thing is that when you're removing the plants, because you're removing them, so you can compost, or you can put in a dumpster, you're removing as well nutrients. When you're cutting the plants, you're not putting chemicals. When you're cutting the plants, you're not having the plants decay after they die and release a nutrient in the water, which eventually could bring to algae growth. That's something that is not going to happen when you do this, when you mechanically remove the cut.
But when you say remove, you mean cut. You can't actually just go down and pull it out.
Well, you have different mechanical removals. You have actually you have different technique. There are some that looks exactly like a mower. It's just or scissors, like they cut like this, and then everything goes to a conveyor belt and get to the back. You have those that have this, like you said, spinning mechanism that untangle the plant and pull them out from the bottom and remove the roots and everything. And you also have a new method that actually go even down to the sediment and grind everything, including the tuber and everything else. That's actually Dan Canfield over at UF just contacted me because he wants to have a student. His son actually wants his son to be on the project for his master's student. So it's a technique that continue. Dan Canfield is like the top in terms of weed management in Florida from UF. So different methods. The one I like is the one, the Swedish machine that the district as well, the Sweden Water Management District has, and that's the way they manage the canals. They understand that if you use chemicals, the chemical eventually will reach, you connect it to the ocean some ways, and then the ocean will receive these chemicals, and you can have adverse effects on the ecology of the ocean. Again, I'm an oceanographer. The reason I'm here, I'm trying to find good solutions so that everybody's happy and we still preserve the coastal systems. Your system are semi-open. They do have access to the bay, whether it's through groundwater or whether it's through the Cocohatchee Canal.
You also,
Go ahead.
your report is very thorough. Thank you. There are some things in there. How often do these have to be repeated, like your measurements and?
Like I mentioned, for the sediment, only once a year. For the bacteria, will be concurrent or at the same time as the water column. All right, and the water column is 3 times in the year. The 3 important periods: the end of the dry season, after the flush, and after the rainy season.
But is that just for the initial study, or would that be an ongoing thing that in
No, that would
year
be-
3, we'd be doing sediment, and year 4, we'd be doing sediment?
No, that will be all in 1 year, so we're talking 1 year funding. And Carlton Lakes, they wanted a little bit more because they did some modification, and they wanted to have here and there some spot, survey that we added as an addendum. That's something that was not, I already had a good idea of what was going on. That will give me a good idea of what's going on in your lake, how healthy they are, and a good baseline to have, and to know if you're on track. Like when you're going to the doctor for follow-up every 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, you can. It doesn't have to be me, but the person who will be doing that will be happy that they have that good baseline thorough, and you can do. Oh, this pond doesn't look good. Maybe we should investigate. Does it want to look good? Okay. Yeah, after that, it can be on a on a need basis, pretty much. Or some pond we didn't survey this time, because we took only a third, and we found that these ponds are really weird, and we're not sure why. Then it might demand more attention. But I really suggest at the beginning, unless you have some homeowner are really unhappy with a pond and you really want to put that as a top priority, I think random is best, because there'll be less complaints about jealousy because they got their pond survey and mine didn't survey. Yeah, you have to take that into account as well. The human factor.
Questions? Anyone? Questions?
Please bring it in.
If we do cutting, and I know you said there's 3 different types of cutting.
Oh yes, there are not many.
What would the frequency need to be of? if
It all
you
depends
just
of,
cut? It's like every year, every 6 months?
No, it depends on the growth period. When the plants are growing actively. Generally, during the winter, they're not growing that fast. And although it's not like a winter in higher states, where everything's frozen and nothing grows. In Florida, they do grow faster than when they're under the tropic, but they do slow down during the winter. Also, during the winter is generally the best time to apply herbicide if that's a weed control, if we go that route. Because some might think that mechanical removal might not work well for some plants. They generally, when the plant is actively growing and healthy, it's much more difficult to knock it out. But when it's weakened because it's colder and it's not growing actively, it's easier. The herbicide has more effect, so meaning that you're using less herbicide. We can come up with a plan if we decide to go the herbicide way, and I'm not an herbicide expert, but I work with people from Fish and Wildlife Commission that basically treat Lake Trafford, and we can come up with a plan because they have the same idea as me, as we want to protect the bay. So if we use less chemicals, better for the bay. And we can come up with a plan and say, okay, we want to be careful about the application, what type of chemical you need to use. That's something I need to add to my arsenal, is be more knowledgeable, and I'm planning this year to go to one of those workshops about weed management, to have at least a good background about the different chemicals and what they do, and what's the positive, what the pros and cons, because they're not perfect. They have collateral damages for all of them. And that's what I say, when you do mechanical removal, you don't really have much of a negative effect. The only thing you can have is, and it's the jury's still out, is for hydrilla. Hydrilla, again, that nasty weed, is that when you fragment it, it can actually regrow from the fragments. So some people are very opposed to it, and some people say, no, now we have the technology capture 95% of all the fragments, and actually it doesn't spread much. Especially if you have grass carp at the same time, which we know will eat those fragments. So, the research is still ongoing, of course. That's why it's fun to be a researcher.
Just to be clear, if we do some of this, or all of it, or whatever, at the end, we're gonna have a report saying what the sediment is, and what the water column is, and what's all. Is there also gonna be an action plan for
Yes.
any shortcomings?
Yes, basically you'll have at the end recommendations based upon the diagnostics of each pond, and applying that diagnostic to the pool of ponds that are around. And then basically I'll tell you, well, this pond is, has very, very high nutrients, and by looking and walking around, we've seen that, there were a lack of plants. You might want to do some planting, or we've seen visible erosion. you know, the type of grass, and maybe you want to move a little bit the edge and put more littorals, you know, stuff like that. Treatment eventually, you know, we can think about different treatment. Aeration if needed. You know, aerators are a good way to oxygenate the water and boost up the muck reduction, because you have the bacteria using the oxygen actively feeding on the muck. So if we know the bacteria and we know the environmental condition, we have a better way to tell you what would be best in terms of treatment. But you're right about that. We're not doing any treatment. That's not at the university. We don't have like an IFAS extension at FGCU, which actually would do that actively. We're just the doctor. We don't really we give you an idea of what's going on, and I can point you to different company that are taking our Greenscape Alliance workshop and certification. So you're not getting somebody who will just not understand well the ecology. But we're not doing any treatment. I want to be clear with that.
Okay, anyone
Besides
else?
the bacterial treatment, we might do that if we get it for free.
You're talking about carp as being part of this whole process.
Carp will be no, it would be
An option, or?
no, it would be something we would eventually recommend based upon the type of plants you have and the bathymetry and the size and the amount of shallow water where the plants can grow, so you can adequately calculate how many carps you need. Because the carp is based normally. So what happened with Miramar Lakes is that they didn't do bathymetry, and they had a big problem, and there were a lot of people pushing adding carps, and they calculated the number of carps to be added based upon the entire surface area from the growers. However, the plants don't grow in the center; it's too deep. There's no light there, so they added way too many carps. I would say about 10 times fold higher than what it was supposed to, and they just ate everything, including the pointweed, which actually desirable, and they ate also the hydrilla, which also was indesirable, but they ate everything, and now they got no plants for it, and now they got spending dollars to just get the carps out,
Remove the carp.
Yeah.
and they're not easy to remove because they jump. I mean, we tried. We had to hire. We had at FGCU we had a lot of students, so we just say, you can fish in that pond, in that lake, and just remove as many carp as you want. We have spearfishing guys who actually, we have a spearfishing club, so we go out there. But the water is very turbid, so it's hard to see them. And then we try netting, but they jump very high, and they can be actually a hazard because they can knock you off. Yeah, but they don't reproduce. They're triploid carps, so at least that thing is comforting. Although there is a 0.001% chance that they can reproduce. So you still have that little chance that you might have a couple in there that will eventually mate, and then you have a big problem. Actually, the city of Naples contacted me about that because they think that they got some that are in the canal that's coming from the retention ponds, and they were wondering about the reproduction. So yeah, it's possible. It's very unlikely, but it's possible.
I've seen it up in New York where they put carp into some of the lakes that feed into the reservoirs.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a lot of negative effect rather than positive, because basically they just ate everything.
Because they probably had, so for Lake
That's-
Trafford, for example, we decided to add some, and Lake Trafford is 1,500 acres, and we decided to only add 150.
Yeah.
So we're going very, very slowly, and then once we find that sweet spot,
Yeah.
we stop. But it's going to be like a 10-year action management plan.
Yeah.
It's not going to be every 6 months we're going to, because they grow fast, but as they grow, they also eat more. And when they get too big, actually they slow down, so they
Right.
eat less. So it's very kind of, it's kind of tricky too. But we have models that can help us, gauging, their efficiency. And at the same time also with trading. So we're going to be extremely careful because we don't want them to eat the good native plants that are there. Because they favor hydrilla. They love hydrilla.
What's
So
hydrilla?
Hydrilla is again that invasive weed. That's
What's it
coming-
look like then? In the deeper water, or?
Well, actually, hydrilla can grow as deep as the algae. So yes, when I teach in my class, well, I call it the perfect plant because it's got 4 ways of reproduction. It's got seeds, it's got tubers, you can fragment it, and you can also do non-parthenogenic reproduction. So it's really perfect for reproduction, and it grows very fast, and it can grow at very, very low amount of light. So basically as deep as where the algae can grow. So it's really, really invasive.
You mentioned Illinois pondweed and hydrilla. I guess are those 2 species we have in our lakes? Do you know?
I don't know because I haven't looked.
We don't
I
know.
haven't looked.
You don't know just by looking at
If
it.
if I walk around, and I walked around, but I think I saw hydrilla, but I don't remember seeing any other point where maybe I didn't go to the right. I don't think we went to the.
Because I don't know which is
part of
what, so it's like, yeah.
Yeah, but I realize, I mean,
Sure.
just for ecologists, the meeting I was to, you know, they were talking mainly about hydrilla and milfoil, which is another invasive, but we don't have a lot of milfoil around here. It's mostly hydrilla, yeah, Illinois pointweed sometimes. But Illinois pointweed is native, but it can, you know, it can grow in great expense, but not as bad as having hydrilla. Easier to control, and grass carp likes it. So you know, if that's pointweed, I think using grass carp would be a good way to manage them. But again, using with parsimony and very slow introduction, little by little, would be a good way to manage it.
How often would you check the bacteria levels on this study?
It's like I said, it would be at the same time we're doing the water quality, so 3 times.
Is that enough?
Not enough, but you know, it's expensive, the sequencing and all that, because bacteria can turn over in a matter of 1 day.
And how many spots would you check?
It would be just, I need to talk more about to my peer about that, because he wrote that portion. But I think it would be just in the center, where basically you have the much muck accumulation and potentially the highest diversity.
But can it vary throughout the lake system?
It varies, well, I don't think, my gut, because I don't think we have the data, because it would cost a lot of money to just do, you know, a spatial variation of all the bacteria in the pond. I don't think it's ever been done. So we're doing center because we assume that the center collects, you know, whatever is on the side and the center, and it will tell you, you know, what's there potentially. Not necessarily that will be in great number, but you'll find them with the DNA sequencing. So that's probably where you're going to have the highest diversity of bacteria will be in the center. And this is our assumption. I might, if you want, I can ask my Hitoshi, and he will tell me exactly where he thinks it could be the best. Or you can do. I've seen it doing it to save money. It would take a transect. He would go from the shore to the center, and then he will mix it, and then he will, you know, that would be his composited sample, and you will know, you know, what potentially we have through that entire transect. That would be another way to do it.
Could you comment on the value of your extensive studies versus hiring a company or companies that specialize in this field?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I do consulting on the side, so I know exactly what does the overhead. Typical overhead for the company I work with, called E&E, Ecology and Environment, is 200%. So let's say you have a $100,000 project, it costs basically $200,000. And you know, the work is in par with what we do. So the overhead is much higher. In terms of writing a report, the reason they come to me is because I have more background, scientific background to interpret the results. Very often what I've seen coming from a consulting company, and I have homework coming to see me because they didn't know what to do with the data. So they asked me to interpret the data. So in terms of interpretation, I think I have an edge compared to most of the consulting companies. Other than that, you know, it's a viable option. But generally it costs more because, you know, they're profit oriented and we're not profit. The negotiated overhead is, I think I put 18.8%. You see, so 18.8 compared to 20%. It's a pretty big gap. And yeah, they will have to, the rate I have for the nutrient, they're not gonna get that rate. This is as low as it can go. Yeah. Generally for all the nutrient, if you go to Sanders Lab, which is the equivalent, it will be about $150 for all the nutrient, and I only charge 50 for all the nutrients, so a third less. Because I do that with Wink News or NBC when we go to the Caloosahatchee River, they send it to Sanders, so I know exactly what their costs are. Because it's quick, they can do a fast turnover, but it's more expensive. So a consulting company will have to do that, send it to a lab, which can be more expensive. Students are paid undergrad $8.50 an hour. The E&E company undergraduate hires are about $35, $38 an hour. Graduate student $12 an hour, and graduate student over at E&E who work there at about $48, $45. I'm talking real cost, with all the fringe, how much it costs. Not really what they bank at home, but the cost is. For us, it's with everything, including the fringe. So I think it's cost effective. Yeah, we can do more with less money. Yes.
Okay, anyone else? All right, I think we've got it, Professor, and we appreciate the proposals and the presentation very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. My goal is really to not only help you guys figure out your lakes and helping managing them, but it also helps undergraduate and graduate students got experience eventually will find a job. Keep that in mind. And that's as an undergrad institution, that's really one of my top priorities. That they got good background and find a job. And it helps the research, and I presented my result yesterday about my ponds, and I had a very good audience. Urban ecology is a new paradigm in science, and we don't know much about it. And that really helps.
Okay.
So you're doing a good thing too.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So
Which
let's take a
consulting
brief-
company would not do that.
a
It would
brief
not present anything.
stretching break and wish the professor well, and then we'll just reconvene for a little more.